Salinas opened a briefcase from which he removed a set of binocular goggles, a high-intensity headlamp, and a small black container about the size of an eyeglass case. He put on the goggles and the lamp, switched it on, turning himself into something like E.T. on a spelunking expedition. He approached the painting and from his little case drew a shiny small tool. "He's taking a core to analyze the paint layers," Krebs said. "Tiny and virtually invisible. He'll check the pigments and the ground for age and anachronism, which of course he will not find." "I hope not. What was all that about exact dimensions?" "Well, obviously, whatever connoisseurship and technical analysis may say, the thing is worthless without an impeccable provenance. Now, with a drawing, or some minor Corot, or even Rubens, this is easily handled, as I'm sure you know. It's nothing to prepare a 17th century bill of sale. Old Baldassare can do it in his sleep. And there are thousands of dusty garrets in Europe and ancient families who will attest, for a consideration, that their ancestor, the Count, bought the thing in 16-whatever. But for something like this, such dodges will not do, not at all." Salinas seemed to be finished at the painting. He switched off his lamp, removed his goggles, and held up a small vial as if it were the cure for cancer. "I have it," he said, and placed the vial into his little box. "Excellent," said Krebs. "Franco will drive you to the Ciampino airport. The jet you came on is fueled and waiting, and you should be back at your desk in Madrid," he checked his wristwatch, "no more than 4 hours after you left. A long siesta, but not unknown in Madrid, I believe." Salinas smiled and shook hands with both of us, with the usual assurances of goodwill. Not entirely hiding what I saw, close up now, was extreme terror. He packed up his things and departed in something of a rush. I heard the Mercedes start up outside. "A useful little man, that," said Krebs reflectively as the sounds of the car receded. "And a bitter man. Well-trained, but without the flair needed in a museum director nowadays. He was passed over for promotion as director of collections, and this is his revenge. And his prosperous retirement." "He's going to buy the painting for the Livia?" Krebs gave me an unbelieving look and laughed. "Of course not. His job is to give us a flawless provenance." "How?" "That you will see with your own eyes, perhaps as soon as next week, when we go to Madrid." "We?" "Yes, of course." He looked at his watch again. "You know it's past 1, aren't you famished? I am." With that, we left the house and walked down the street and across the Piazza San Cosimato to a little restaurant where they apparently knew Krebs and were very glad to see him. They gave us a table by the window, and when we were settled with a plate of dried anchovies and one of whitebait fritters and a bottle of Krug, he said, "Wilmot, I realize you are an artist, and thus not entirely of this world, but I must press upon you that from now on, until however long it takes, you must keep yourself under almost military discipline. No wandering off, and no unauthorized calls. When we return, I will ask you to surrender your cellular phone. It's not me who makes these rules." "Who does, then?" "Our friends, my partners in this venture." "You mean you're mobbed up?" I said, or rather the wine said. "Excuse me?" "Mobbed up. You're working for the Mafia?" He seemed to find this amusing, and while he was chuckling, the waiter came and we ordered food. The waiter said the Scampi Casino di Venezia was very good, and Krebs said we had to have it in honor of the city where we began our association. So I said, "Okay, I'll have that too." And he ordered a bottle of Procanico to go with it. When the man had gone, he continued, "Mobbed up, I must remember that expression. But let us not confuse things. The Mafia is about whores and drugs and corrupt contracts for poured concrete. We are talking about an entirely different level of enterprise. Criminal enterprise. Whatever happened to letting the experts come to their own conclusions? Whatever happened to Giordano Luca? You're planning a major fraud." He looked at me with what seemed like amused pity. "Ah, Wilmot, did you ever actually think it would be anything else? Really?" And I had to admit to myself that he was right. I do have a habit of believing my own lies. I took a breath, drank some more wine, and asked, "So when do I get my money? Or was that another thing, like those crummy sketches you raved about that I should have realized was too good to be true. "Good God, do you think I intend to cheat you?" he said, with what seemed to be genuine amazement. "That's the last thing in the world I would ever do. Wilmot, I've been searching most of my life for someone like you, someone with your incredible facility with the styles of the past. You are, to my present knowledge, unique in the world. I would have to be insane to treat you with anything but the greatest respect. That's terrific, but on the other hand, I have to ask you if I can make a phone call. I told you I don't make those rules. But when the operation is complete and the surveillance is lifted, you may call anyone you like. Always being discreet, of course. Because you understand me, there is no, how shall I put it, statutes of limitations on art forgery. That is, until the actual witnesses are deceased. The authenticity of the painting is always at risk. With one careless word, an object worth many tens, hundreds of millions, becomes a mere pastiche and worth nothing. And then the buyers look to get their money back. They go to the dealer, and of course he talks, and then the cord that holds it all together unravels. Then it is either prison for all of us, or a worse fate, if in any way the gentlemen I referred to earlier are in the least implicated. Not a happy prospect, especially not for you, or for your family." When he said that, I almost lost a mouthful of whitebait, but I managed to get it down and asked him, "What are you talking about? My family?" "Well, only as a means of controlling you, while you remain alive." "Excuse me?" "Yes, well, I speak loosely of witnesses, but in affairs like this one, there is only one witness who counts. I mean, Baldassare knows, and Franco, and that girl who posed, but no one cares about them. Anyone can cry forgery, and the interests that wish for the painting to be original can always shout them down. It happens all the time. But one witness can never be shouted down." He paused and inclined his head toward me and snapped a bit of fish from his fork. "The forger himself," I said. "Just so. Now don't be downhearted, Wilmot, I beg you. As I keep saying, this is a new life you're in now. Danger, yes, but when has real art not been associated with a certain danger? Quattrocento Florence was a violent place, and art's greatest patrons have always been violent men." "Like the Nazis?" A little dig there, but he didn't blink. "I was thinking of the robber barons of America, or the aristocrats of Europe, and the artists themselves have always been freebooters, living on the edges of society. When art becomes domesticated into a branch of show business, it becomes flaccid and dull, as now. Sorry, but that's nonsense, like Harry Lime's remark about Switzerland and the cuckoo clock in The Third Man. Velázquez had a steady job. Yes, and in his lifetime he did fewer than 150 paintings. Rembrandt, living on the edge of life, did over 500. And Vermeer, who was even more on the edge, did 40. I'm sorry, it won't wash, Krebs. You can't generalize about what kind of temperament and what social conditions produce great painting. It's a mystery. I could see he was starting to get a little steamed to have his pet theories exploded like this, but it's always gotten me steamed to hear theories about how art happens dumped on my head by people who never handled a brush. But then he shrugged and smiled and said, "Well, perhaps you're right. It is a life I am used to, and we all tell ourselves stories to justify ourselves to ourselves and others because we wish to have some company in these little scenarios. But I see it is not to be. You have a head as hard as mine, and really it does not matter in the least, as long as you do not forget that the sword that hangs over us is harder than both our heads. Ah, good, here's our meal."